So we'll call this meeting to order. It's the Water Resources Advisory Committee for today, Wednesday, May 1st. Thank you all for being here. And let's start with a quorum check. If you are a voting person today, if you could raise your hand, please. We have quorum. Thank you so much. And we'll start with introductions. I'm Andy Pease, San Luis Obispo City Council.
Christine Mulholland, Environmental at Large.
Linda Seifert, representing District 3.
Cheryl Conway, Cayucas Advisory Council.
Jim Garing, District 4 Rep.
Tim Walters, Development at Large.
Steve Simpson, Shannon, San Juan Water District.
Ron Mans, Slope County Public Works.
Aaron Floyd, City of San Luis Obispo, Utilities. Lee Nesbitt, Health Crescent Water District.
I'm sorry, what? Thank you, Desi.
Dennis Lux, District 1.
Tom Mora, RCD.
Greg Graywall, 5th District Representative.
John Snyder from Nepal.
Kurt Gonzalez, City of Paso Robles.
Sarah Trammell, County Public Works.
Bob Lucas, Visitor. Dave Chiving, Environment at Large.
Eric Greening, Environmental at Large.
Steph Wald, Environmental Alternate, and I've been telling you about the name change that Central Coast Salmon Enhancement has been undergoing. It's almost done. Now it's Creek Lands Conservation. Creek Lands Conservation. Hopefully that'll stick.
Linda Chipping, Coastal San Luis RCD.
Greg Armstrong, Napomo CSD. Good evening, Napomo CSD.
Cynthia Replogle, Oceana CSD.
Marlis McPherson, Long Bay City Council.
All right.
And Ray Diaz, County Public Works.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. All right. First item of business here is the meeting minutes. Any comments or changes? Eric.
Thank you. On the third page of the minutes, which actually says page 4, second paragraph, Member George Kendall asked, et cetera, I would add after multiple areas, comma, and suggests a role for resource conservation districts. And then on the last paragraph under that item, just above the stormwater item, I don't know if George is here to check with that, but I do remember that was what he said. Anyway, then relative to the motion, I think it would be more accurate, and we can review the tapes, I guess, but 5-year plan to support groundwater recharge study, planning, and implementation by resource conservation districts in the amount of $50,000 per year. I remember that the conversation and the motion were directed toward RCDs. Don't you remember that?
Yes, I remember that as part of the general discussion. I'm not sure that it is critical to have that in the specific direction.
No, we're not earmarking, but I think, didn't the motion kind of point toward the RCDs?
I don't think so. This motion that I made, the last one you're saying here?
Yeah.
No, I don't think it had to do with RCDs.
I remember talking about it for sure, but it seemed to me that was more we had some ideas on how to do that and thoughts that the RCDs would have implementable projects. I do agree that the feasibility planning and implementation, I would certainly be comfortable in adding that.
So leave the RCDs out, but I do remember that George Kendall suggested a role for the RCDs, so I would stand by that change.
So you're closer to the kind of that second paragraph. George Kendall asked what the county's role is. That
rather than for multiple areas, you want to be more specific than that? I mean,
he said, after multiple areas, comma, and suggests a role for resource conservation districts.
You know, I think when it came to the budget discussion, I did not make a motion that was that specific. It was to keep that, to put that placeholder, which we didn't have, that we had suggested 10,000 and Courtney said, oh, 25, 50, she's comfortable with that, so we put the 50 in there. But that's just a placeholder for that groundwater recharge suggestion that was made by George.
Okay.
So you would
Do you
go
wanna
with
add the
study,
implementation?
planning, and implementation in the amount of 50,000 per year and leave the RCDs out?
I think you could add it to the George Kendall piece.
It's in the George Kendall, yeah.
Yeah, we could add it there,
That
so.
will maybe cover us.
Okay. All right, but adding implementation to the actual motion, are you, Christine, does that seem like your recollection? Right now, it just says recharge feasibility planning in the amount of 50,000.
Well, I think 50,000 was not going to reach any implementation. 50,000, we'd be lucky to plan something for that. That's my personal thought on that.
Do you remember, though, what you
I
were...
don't remember saying implementation, but I
think it was kind
I
of more
don't know.
broad toward,
it was putting that line item in the budget.
Well, I think if this was transcribed from the actual audio recording, I think it would have been stated there. If implementation was stated
okay.
in the minutes. So.
Okay, so it sounds like the one change that we're kind of in agreement about is about George and having his identification of RCDs in particular for potential implementation.
And that I do remember that continued to be discussed, but you may be right that it didn't get into the motion. I mean, you made the motion, so you should remember it better than anyone else does.
Okay, great, thank you. Anybody else have comments on the minutes? If not, I'll take a motion.
Second.
Sorry, who was the?
I move.
Thank you. And a second. Jim and Christine. Roll call vote, please.
Okay. So for the meeting minutes as amended, Dennis Laux, approved. Bill Garfinkel. Linda Seifert.
Aye.
Jim Gehring.
Yes.
Greg Graywell.
Yes.
Steve.
Tim Walters.
Yes, sir.
Christy Mulholland.
Aye.
Eric Green.
Yes.
David Shipping.
Yes.
Linda Shipping.
Yes.
Tom Mora.
Abstain.
John Reed. George Kendall is not here. James Sweeney not here. Anthony Lindstrom. Okay. Steve Simpson.
Yes.
Lee Nesbitt. Lan George. Kirk Gonzalez. Marcia Guthrie. Andy Peace.
Yes.
Craig Armstrong.
Yes.
Cynthia Raplogal.
Yes.
And Steve Meyer. Yeah. Okay, motion carries.
Are you our Pismo?
Well,
Or babe?
yeah, Matt Mikulicki hasn't been on the council for some time now.
All right, and so she's our more.
Yeah, I am the representative from Halifax.
Okay.
Marla
Have we
Smith.
changed that? Vote, or do we need some?
And I just,
Yeah.
I think I'll look to see if Laura sent me a notification. I don't remember seeing it, so.
Okay.
Thank you for being here.
Well, I missed a couple months, but
Yeah, right. We'll
Here
catch
now.
up. We'll catch up next time. Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you. Motion carries. Okay, let's go on to ongoing updates. I'll pause at each one. If anybody has comments, just holler. Rain and reservoir report. Groundwater basin management efforts.
I'm John Snyder.
John, thank you.
I haven't been around in a while. I just wanted to update on the Santa Maria groundwater basin litigation. I don't know whether you're aware, but basically there was a fish case, and it was combined with the Santa Maria case, and then that was moved to the federal court. I think it was commonly believed that all of the action was moved to the federal court. I'm concerned about basin management and overdraft, and wanted an overdraft analysis on a legal standard, not a stipulation. So there was a motion filed in both the federal court and the state court on the 16th. The federal court decided they didn't really want to deal with that, and so essentially it's split back again now, so that the state court is dealing with the new motion, and continuing jurisdiction is no longer on hold, and the fish case is in the federal court. And then also, we haven't seen any action on the appellate issue, which is whether landowners have to sue continuously in order to protect their overlying rights. The purveyors are saying we do, we're saying we don't, but because the lower court said we do have to sue continuously, the motion to protect the basin was filed. So hopefully we'll get a hearing to determine what the status of the basin is, because the stipulations that we have are not actually based on the legal standard, and don't use the word overdraft anywhere in their text.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on that? Mladen?
I'm sorry if I took your turn.
Hi, I'm Mladen Bando, County Public Works. Just an update to the Department of Water Resources reprioritization or prioritization phase 2. That happened yesterday. They published the draft results. There's a 30-day comment period due May 30th. If I can submit comments on the reprioritization on two basins, the Los Osos Valley Basin and the Santa Maria Basin. And the Los Osos Valley Basin, a basin boundary modification request was submitted, and what it did was split the basin into the adjudicated Los Osos area basin and the Warden Creek basin, two sub-basins of that one basin, and both of those basins are reprioritized as very low. The Los Osos area because of the adjudication, and the Warden Creek based on their factors that they looked at, and the Santa Maria Basin also because of adjudication, which includes the fringe areas, and the newly created Arroyo Grande Basin, which is a separate sub-basin, also prioritized very low. So
it's the Napomo Valley, which is not in the adjudication, a separate sub-basin. Did it get split as a separate sub-basin?
So during the basin boundary modification, there were several fringe areas, and Napomo Valley was removed as a fringe area.
So it's not a basin, or what?
So Napomo Valley, Mesa, or I'm trying to remember the other names, the Pismo, those were just removed as basins entirely.
Oh, so they're not under Sigma even.
Correct. Ziegler Canyon still is part of the Santa Maria Basin, and it is a fringe area.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
So in our updates, we had 6 priority basins. Now there's technically 8 basins that we're working with, and so we're just calling them local groundwater basins that we're having efforts in, regardless of the prioritization.
My understanding is the Tascadero subbasin is moving forward even though it's not mandatory.
That's correct. Or even though that's not required under Sigma because it's very low prioritization. And same thing with Warden Creek, and same thing with the Arroyo Grande Basin. They're all very low, but we do have grant funding for Arroyo Grande in place, and which is part of the fringe areas for Santa Maria. And so,
in basins where there is ongoing adjudication, is there the potential for re-examining the priority if the adjudication seems to be going sideways or is not successful in stabilizing the basin?
Adjudication is one of the factors in the prioritization, and whenever the Department of Water Resources decides to reprioritize, that would be a factor in there. It's their effort to reprioritize.
Thank you.
Thanks. Greg?
Well, in the Paso Basin, 2 chapters were held over, and they're going to have another meeting on May 29th at 4 p.m. before that July meeting to discuss those 2 chapters again. And then there's only a couple chapters after that, and all 12 chapters of the GSP will be written. Then there'll be a certain period of time for a review so that they can be turned in on time for 2020. Then Sarah was good enough to send me her information that she gave us last month on the integrated water management, on the stormwater money that was available from the Prop 1, and I introduced that stuff at the meeting too. So maybe some of that could be worked on with the GSP on trying to get projects on what we talked about last month.
Kind of the coordination of those efforts,
Yeah.
for the recharge.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay. Thank you. David?
One question. If a basin is under adjudication and it drops out of the priority on that basis, if anybody sues anybody, say in the Paso Robles Basin, and it goes to a court, would that drop it out of SGMA into an adjudicated basin status or not?
No.
It wouldn't?
No,
Okay.
because the exception refers to ones that have been adjudicated, not ones that are in adjudication.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Steve. All right. Anything else on basins? Greg, is the Paso Basin getting a third-party peer review type of thing for that plan?
No, not that I know of. The only people that they're looking at that are reviewing anything or taking comments are that signed up on the different websites or that come to the meetings.
Yeah.
And part of it was they built a chapter, and then they say, okay, they accept the chapter, and then they say, okay, we'll look at it later if somebody wants to change something.
Oh.
Well, we don't want to wait. That's why there's going to be like 60 to 90 days at the end. So any of the things that were discussed in the chapters that weren't changed that people accepted can be done. Obviously, there's a percentage of voting, and the chapters all need to be agreed to to come up with the total percent. But some of the stuff with was done. Chapter 9 references 3 of the chapters.
Right.
And
so if they
it deals with amounts and stuff. And the bottom line is the DWR wants pumping to be reduced, and a lot of this chapter was talking about bringing in other water, more or less like state water, and creating water banking and injection pumps and different things that cost millions of dollars that there's no funding for. And so, it's more like last month I showed you that rain chart.
Yeah.
And say more work should be done on gathering the rainfall that we have here that's diverted water instead of buying diverted water from somebody else. And that's, I think, where the direction should go in working on that stuff. Some of the Nacimiento water that people are looking at to buy, that would be a private deal that would be made between them and Paso Robles or any of the other players that are involved in the Nacimiento pipeline.
Steve?
So the 2 water districts did hire an expert to do peer review as it goes along. So it's not external, it's internal. But there is a peer review going on all the time.
Gotcha. And that's specific to that basin?
Specific just to that basin.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes, San Luis Obispo, Edna Valley is, a couple steps behind, so it's good to be able to hear what's going on with the other basins. So thank you. All right, integrated regional water management. Mladen, do you have any update for us?
Oh, I can just kind of report on behalf of Brendan Clark.
Yeah.
Just the DWR, Department of Water Resources, had delayed their final proposal solicitation package. And so that delayed the regional water management group's review and recommendation on the projects for the round 1 of the implementation grant that's coming up. So that all got shifted by a month. So that will come back here for WRAC's recommendation.
Thank you. Any questions on that? All right. Stormwater resource plan. Questions or comments? No? Just chicken ahead. Various county water programs, policies, ordinances. Eric?
Is there anyone who knows a date or rough timing for the fractured rock policies to come back to the board? I guess we'll just keep watching for it.
Do we know that's coming?
Well, the discussion kind of led to bring back some possible actions in a few months. And I'm not sure what a few months is, given that the water division is somewhat short-handed at this point. But we'll just keep watching for it.
Thank you. This would maybe also be a time to follow up. Greg had mentioned last time some state legislation about groundwater, but we saw that it was actually just focused on stock ponds, and so it wasn't as relevant to our work here. So we didn't do further follow up on that. Thank you. Okay, and then any open reporting on water conservation opportunities and information? Staff?
I attended the last 2 days a conference called Localizing California Water. It was held down in the Ojai area. And at some point I'd like to share some of the things that I learned and hopefully interest you in inviting some of the speakers that I heard. And then the second item is that yesterday, I believe, or it might have been the day before, Governor Newsom announced an executive order related to developing water portfolios for essentially growing water portfolios locally for communities. And so the idea is to really look at how we're doing water locally as opposed to focusing in on what the state can do for us. So a much more homegrown, localized orientation to how we do water in the state of California. So take a look at the executive order. I haven't read it myself yet, but there were a bunch of people hashtagging during the conference. I don't know what that means, but so take a look at the executive order. See if it's something that applies to us.
Great. Yeah, let's talk about kind of what could be agendized here. That would be helpful. I was really interested and didn't make it down to that conference. Awesome. Okay. All right. Anything else in those ongoing updates that I missed? Okay. Next item is an overview and current status of Lake Nacimiento and Lake San Antonio Interlake Tunnel Project. We have Ron Munns to present on that. Do you have any opening remarks first? Okay. Take it away, Ron.
Okay. Guess that's it. Just a quick introduction who I am. I'm Ron Munns. I'm the Utilities Division Manager for the San Luis Obispo County Public Works Department. It's deja vu to be here. I worked for the city of San Luis Obispo for almost 26 years. So first time I've been back in here, I think, since I left the city. So anyway, if I'm looking at the pictures, just ignore that. Anyway, what I need to do is a bit of disclaimer here. I am part of the Monterey County Reservoir Operations Subcommittee that looks at the operations of Nacimiento and San Antonio Reservoir. I go to monthly meetings up in Salinas where we talk about a host of things regarding the reservoirs and groundwater recharge up in Salinas Valley. And I do get updates periodically about this project. The one thing I have found is Monterey County, they're not really great communicators. And so they hold a lot of information close. So what you're going to see here was actually I borrowed, with permission of course, slides from a presentation that's probably about a year old that they did up at Heritage Ranch as a public presentation to the Lakeside users and NARMAC, which is the group up there. And consequently, there's not much has changed, maybe some of the numbers. So towards the end of and it was like 50 some odd slides, I pared it down to about 12. So this will be a really high flyover. I'm not an expert. If you have questions, I can go find the answers if I don't know the answers. So that's my disclaimer. So what you're seeing here is a presentation. I took off their logo just so it wasn't me pretending to be a Monterey County employee. So here's, with that, I'll start a little bit of the overview. Oh yeah, before I get started, everyone here I'm sure is fairly knowledgeable about both reservoirs, but I thought I'd just do a really quick overview that Nacimiento was finished construction in 1957. SLO County did not participate in that project. There's a lot of folklore around that, but basically we didn't. When Monterey County went to design and construct San Antonio, the Board of Supervisors at that time decided, well, we need to get in the water game here. And that reservoir was completed in 1967. And so in order for the Monterey County to get our concurrence on that, we did negotiate a 17,500 acre-foot allocation from Nacimiento Reservoir. It's a really odd relationship because the county pays for maintenance of San Antonio Dam, but receive no water from it. So as we move forward with this Interlake Tunnel project, there may be other opportunities, which I'll talk about at the end. So if there's any other questions about the reservoirs, please step up. Okay.
And Ron, you can use the wheel to scroll down.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to try to do. There we go. Okay, quick project orientation. You have Nacimiento Reservoir, of course, over on the left. San Antonio, you can kind of see the ocean up in the top there. The watersheds, of course, are up here. Right down by the words Interlake Tunnel. I know it's small, so it's hard to see. Right where tunnel is the San Antonio River, which hits the Salinas River. Likewise with the Nacimiento River hitting the Salinas River. The area that receives the recharge value, of course, is part of the Salinas up there, but it's that green area where most of the agriculture takes place and where most of the property owners in that area have been assessed to construct both dams and then also maintain the systems. So that's kind of what you see. That little line is where the proposed tunnel will be. And I have a little bit better close-up coming here. A little bit better view. It's about 2 miles. You're sitting on Interlake Road right there where the red line crosses. You're sitting there looking at both reservoirs. And so that's how close it is. It's going to be about a 2-mile tunnel, which I'll talk about just a little bit. 10-foot diameter. That looks like it might become a smaller pipe. Anyway, it's going to be gravity fed. So basically, that's the concept, a tunnel from one lake to the other, gravity fed. These are the operating objectives that Monterey County's put out. Based on my experience with the Res Ops group, I would say that the increase of overall surface water storage is their number one. Number 2 would be protect agricultural viability to prime agricultural land. And where was the third one? There's third. Oh, the balance, the hydrologic balance. They're really focused on farming, groundwater recharge, and viability of ag in the Salinas Valley. But these are the other objectives they've listed as well, with a lot of contention on the preservation of recreational opportunities. Some of the hydrological considerations, I know this is small again, I apologize, but the big one here is with the concept, which I'll show here in a minute, and it'll make more sense, is how they balance flows because of Nacimiento's watershed being larger, more productive in terms of runoff versus the San Antonio. It's actually gaining storage, they use the word conservation releases over and over. Basically, that's releases for recharge. There's environmental releases as well, but they use the word conservation releases to indicate additional groundwater recharge opportunities. And also there is that number 3 bullet. You know, that in I think it was 17, it filled and spilled, and what they're trying to do is minimize the spilling and move the water to Lake San Antonio to really to better beneficial use some of that water that just flows down the Salinas and out to the ocean.
And the spillway modifications, is that a physical?
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Part of the plan, which I'm not going to really get into, is at San Antonio to modify the spillway to increase storage capacity. There's a lot of other issues at that dam, the whole spillway. We just got back the Division of Safety of Dams report, and that whole spillway is going to have to be removed and replaced for about $40 million, plus or minus. So anyway, that'd be part of that project. So here's the basic concept. You got Nacimiento, fills 3 times faster than San Antonio. It's kind of similar to locally here. You know, we have Salinas Reservoir and Lopez. They're right next to each other, but Salinas watershed is huge, flows a lot of water. Lopez, we call it kind of a dog. It just doesn't flow as much water. Similar, you look at that map, you got Nacimiento and Salinas just side by side, but it's the same type of thing. The watershed at Nacimiento is huge, collects a lot of water. So you have, you know, Nacimiento with a capacity of, I think it's about 380,000 acre feet. You have San Antonio that has a capacity of about 335,000 acre feet, but is totally underutilized because there's just not enough flow into it. So then that's the tunnel operating function. It's again to transfer water at certain periods of time into San Antonio for future storage and release.
And when you say certain periods of time, is that strictly when Nacimiento looks like it's getting ready to spill? That top level
It's an excellent question, but that hasn't been answered yet. This is the goes into detail because there's a lot of concern. How is this going to operate? And I'll talk just a minute to that, okay? So hang on to that question. So basically, this is how it's supposed to work. You've got Nacimiento that is at 800-foot elevation. Kind of going to your question, see the blue line under Nacimiento. The question is, where is that intake? How far up or down, which will then dictate when they can actually transfer water. And that's the big controversy. You know, lakeside users, rep users, they want it higher, so there's more water staying in the reservoir. I don't personally have an opinion yet because I haven't seen the operating scenarios that they're coming up with, but that's one of the major controversies, and the operating scenarios will help answer that. Then, of course, it just gravity feeds, and then it's put into San Antonio. Now, this is a key slide, and this is when it was presented up at Heritage Ranch, and Aaron and Kirk, you've seen a lot of these pictures or this presentation. This is what kind of made sense of what they're trying to do. Right now, because of the way Nacimiento spills, and how San Antonio doesn't really help much, the concept is right now Nacimiento is the checking account. It's got the most water, so if they keep taking water out of that, it's like paying your bills all the time, and you don't have much savings, so you supplement it when you can with water out of your savings account when they have to meet certain flow conditions. So, I go, okay, that makes sense. So the intent is to flip it by utilizing the storage capacity at San Antonio more efficiently, is keep transferring water, over from the savings account into the new checking account of San Antonio, and use that for the bigger releases that they do now, and hold back water in Nacimiento, which would keep lake levels, typically, we'll see again on the operating scenarios, at a higher level, longer, so it would improve WRAC value, and I think it would help us as participants in the Naci pipeline, give us a little more security in terms of our supply always being there. So that's kind of a general, if you take anything away from it, that's kind of generally where Monterey County's going with how they want to operate under the interlake tunnel pipeline scenario. Now, the next couple of slides are some barriers we ran into. Again, you can kind of ignore all the stuff on the left, but it's that little fish over there, or on the right. That little fish on the left has turned into a major sticking point. Nacimiento has white bass. San Antonio doesn't. Cal Fish and Wildlife does not want white bass in San Antonio. So there's literally been over a year, maybe closer to 2 years of negotiation on how that issue will be handled. And this could be a deal killer because this is going to cost so much money to put in these fish screens and limit the hydrology of the pipe. I'm not sure if that can be overcome or not. That's to be seen. But that's one of the biggest hurdles at this point. They do have agreement on fish screen size, how to build it, the engineering. It's all possible. It's really how much it costs and how it will impact flows on the project.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So what is the problem with having white bass?
It's not a native species. And so
That's an answer. That's not.
What's the problem?
Yeah.
Cal Fish and Wildlife doesn't want a non-native species moving to another reservoir where it's not native.
Was it introduced in Nacimiento?
Yes.
So it's not native there.
It's not native there too. I'm sorry. Yes.
It's a pretty highly predatory fish also.
Yeah.
So when you sell them on, I feel that it could come in contact with a bigger washover or something. It could actually prey upon it. So, because it's such a predatory fish that they really don't want to have it spreading anymore. So they've had to buy the policy decades on the white bass.
Thank you, Eric.
I believe there's also a bottom feeder, and it was picking up methyl mercury, and it featured in the litigation against the mines up the watershed. So that's another problem. It's a poisonous fish if you eat it.
So that's one that's still going to could be a stumbling block for the project. The other issue is, and I'll kind of pass through this kind of quickly, is doing the geotechnical work. This is going to be, I forget how many feet underground the tunnel is, but it's deep. It's like hundreds of feet. And it's going to cross through, when they're doing the geotechnical exploration, it's going to pass through the groundwater basins, which are fractured shale and clay stones. So the fear is you've got ag, you've got rural residential, you've got lots of wells out in the groundwater basin. What is the impact of that tunnel going through? So they're trying to minimize that. One of the key sticking points there was Monterey County wasn't willing to guarantee if they damaged a well, how they would deal with it. But I think they've gotten over that. I think they've got the property owners and the easements in place, or potential for the easements in place to make it happen. But that was another major obstacle, a barrier that they had to overcome. But that one isn't as serious as the white bass. Okay, don't worry about any of these numbers. Again, this was from a year ago, where I wanted to point out that this whole project, at this point, the planning and design is from a DWR grant, a $10 million DWR grant. I think they've burned through almost all that money, so they're going to have to wrap it up soon. And we'll see an update on all these numbers on the right-hand side, probably coming up here shortly. So the work in progress, they're trying to finish up the draft environmental impact report. The biggest thing is this completing of the modeling. The modeling was supposed to have been completed last September, October. It's a USGS-based model. They ran into some problems, and so my understanding is they have completed the baseline and are now doing the operating scenarios, which will answer a lot of the questions that us as water purveyors will have, and the environmental community, lakeside users. There's going to be a lot of answers. Once they've got the baseline done, now they're running all the what-if scenarios. So that's a big one, and that should be done shortly, and they're at 60% design, so design continues. Here's the latest and greatest on timeline. It's still uncertain if this project is economically feasible after all this time and energy that's been put into it. So that's going to be a big question that will be answered here shortly. You can see kind of how it's going to lay out. I'm looking forward to the summer. They'll continue to have public meetings. We can let you know, because then you'll be talking to the engineers and getting all the information directly from Monterey County and their consultants.
Probably at least 5 years ago, on the Pastoral Basin Advisory Committee, I was on a subcommittee that Monterey came and gave us the whole deal. And at that time, it was gonna be at least 60 million to do the tunnel and another, I think 10 million to raise the dam 10 feet at San Antonio.
Right.
Has any of that changed?
I think it's probably higher. My guess.
The other thing is,
I think the fish stream alone is going to be.
Yeah, and they generate a lot of power from Nacimiento, which they don't have the capability to do at San Antonio.
Correct. I don't think that's part of the spillway or the dam modifications is adding hydro. So, yes, sir.
Who would be voting on the Prop 218 and presumably shouldering the cost? What geographic area?
It was that green area.
The green area
that I showed you at the beginning.
Right.
Is the area that receives the benefit.
So most of Salinas Valley is wow.
Right.
That is going to be massive.
But you have to understand, it's a $1.2 billion industry up there that this supports. And so, and it's a, I wish I had the number, but it's a very small number of property owners right now that are shouldering all this. So I think they're looking at maybe expanding the zone of benefit to see if they can get more. I will start with that.
What I haven't been that familiar with it. What's the estimated yield increase of this project?
Well, that's, I have a slide there.
67,000
acre-feet of storage, additional storage, new storage.
Okay, but that's storage. So how much water are you expecting to get out of that?
That yield, annual yield is more down around the 20,000+ acre-feet.
So they're getting 20,000 acre-feet for more than $60 million estimated 4 years ago.
Well, maybe. Again, the operating scenarios and where they actually put that intake will drive a lot of those numbers, acre-feet numbers.
And all the benefit is going to Monterey County.
Correct. At this point, and I'll touch on that here too after this.
If the gross output of the two reservoirs is increasing, which it sounds like it is because they've got a massive seawater intrusion problem in the valley, and if we are transferring water out of Nacimiento and into San Antonio, doesn't that make, and that's probably the argument being put forward by Oak Shores and other people there, doesn't that make the drought-resistant scenario for Nacimiento much more fragile? I know that we have no holdover on 70,000 acre-feet or whatever it is,
right.
But nonetheless, you want water in the reservoir in a couple of dry years, and it sounds like there's going to be less there for a drought.
Okay, here's my basic understanding, is they won't be able to transfer water every year. They will have to, again, it comes back to how they, they do the what-ifs, and then it's going to be a negotiated process. But my understanding is it could help the drought resilience of Nacimiento, because they won't be able to transfer water every year. They only transfer water when it looks like it's going to spill or hits a certain level elevation in the lake to be able to transfer it. And so I think what you'll see, like for instance, last year, we went from 100% down to 11% at Nacimiento. Dramatic. I forget how many, 280,000 acre-feet of release, something like that. And recreation was severely impacted because they didn't even make it through Labor Day weekend for rec elevations. This would keep the lake level higher, and because of that watershed, and this is my guess, this isn't substantiated yet, they'll try to keep that lake level higher for that savings account approach, and then just keep putting into the checking account as often as they can to use that as the big release instead of the way it is now.
They will try to is one thing. The EIR process could be a way that they would be required to, because mitigation relative to that fragility issue, it's not clear to me how low they would let Nacimiento get. Right now, as an isolated reservoir, we sometimes worry about how low it will get. But now there will be someone we can point the finger at if it is allowed to get low. When you talk about negotiations, is our County Public Works or Water Division a participant in those negotiations? And will the mitigation package that's required as an element of the project be an outcome of those negotiations?
Perfect lead-in to what I was going to finish with here. What does it mean to us, the
Yeah.
county? At this point, there is no negotiations. There is really no defined project. It's all conceptual. What we are looking to do, and this is the Nacimiento participants, which is Paso, Timpton, City of SLO, we have Santa Maria Ranch, Pesco, thank you. I was missing one anything. We would look at, in order to endorse the project, kind of similar to what was done back when they built San Antonio, is maybe try to negotiate. And this is why I didn't write it down, because this isn't anything that we proceeded with, is either get carryover storage, because right now, we have the 17.5, the participants have rights to about 15,800, and we maybe use half of that. The rest goes down the river, and we don't have carryover storage rights to store that other half until we need it. So that could be an option. We might be able to negotiate with or maybe some more water, another acre-foot allotment. Again, this is just conceptual at this time. That's kind of where our thought process has gone, and that's where we've gone with our participants, especially with the technical support group, the TSG.
So Monterey County is the lead agency. Our county is a responsible agency. I think we should expect to see it nailed down in the EIR as part of the clear mitigation package.
Absolutely. Well, that's part of the EIR process. They're not going to be able to slide this one under the radar.
So your understanding is we won't actually be seeing the draft until next calendar year, so we don't need to be concerned about it coming out over the summer when we're usually
I think the next
break.
big milestone is the release of the modeling exercise and where those discussions go, because that's going to be very interesting, because that's, again, at our TSG level, we talk about this. It all sounds good in theory, but it really comes down to the detail. That's great.
A few months back at the Board of Supervisors, there was 7 to 8 homes that were below the 825-foot level, which is the top of the spillway. And Monterey was fighting them not to have their homes rebuilt from the fire. Although we changed a few rules and they're able to rebuild those homes with 7 ones. And they are part of also, I know some of those people, because I talked to them afterwards, are part of the lawsuit of them keeping the water at a certain level, because part of the deal when the dam was built is San Luis Obispo County got the tax revenue and the recreation on the lake, and a little, at that time it was 20,000 acre feet, but then it was reduced to 17.5 when the San Antonio deal happened. But they have recorded deal that even on good weekends when they want more beach, they let more water out so they can have more beach, and they lower the dam, and they use 200,000 acre feet. That's normal for them to let out every year. So I would think that they would have to negotiate a lot of stuff with those people, because they're in a big lawsuit right now over that. How are you gonna require people can't build below a certain level if you're always going to keep the lake at a lower level?
It's, I said the capacity is 380,000 acre feet. The flood capacity is quite a bit higher than that.
Yeah.
And that's what they're trying to minimize their liability, the risk, when the lake does exceed and backs up and we go above that 825.
I think they're more worried about how they're going to sell more water for houses being built up in Monterey, because that's what they're letting out.
You have to understand, and this is an interesting group. It's a bunch of farmers, and they have a lot at stake, and they are very protective of this water supply. They don't care about the urban folks. They're managing that water, trying to manage it down to the drop, basically, for recharge in that zone of benefit in the ag areas.
So if there's a 218 and the Lilies Valley participants vote for it, there's a project, is there any financial remuneration to San Luis County at all for the value of that water that's going somewhere else? No. And yet,
Gotta read the water rights license.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get our 17.
You had a question?
well, yeah, you kind of mentioned it, but what is the effect of this on the saltwater intrusion
Of
of
the
the
upper-
upper end?
Well, there's a separate project, Salinas Valley. It's an
I
acronym.
have a house not far from.
Yeah. But there's another diversion project that is relatively new that diverts water specifically for the seawater intrusion up at the mouth. But there's limitations of when the river breaches, when it isn't breaching, how much they can store or release. It's having an impact, but my understanding it hasn't stopped seawater intrusion.
I had an understanding that they had to get the water into the lower, I think they call it the pressure aquifer, and I think it's like as soon as you get to Keene City or someplace like that, this impermeable layer starts, and their seawater intrusion is in the lower aquifer, I believe, and all the way into Salinas. So they have a problem fighting the intrusion by letting the water flow in the river in the lower reaches. They have to somehow get water into the pressure aquifer.
Right. There's the big recycled water project that they've done in Watsonville area there. That's key on that too. So
Yes,
it's just
Poplar
not Salinas
Road.
River water. Yeah. Poplar Road.
Based on your earlier figures of $100 million, that's like $5,000 an acre foot capital cost. Is the operational cost, basically being considered to be de minimis or?
Yeah, I can't answer that. I'm sorry.
I don't know what
I'm kind of getting over my.
All right. Any last questions for Ron? Man, thanks, Dave.
Ron, I did have one quick one. On the public meetings, are those going to be advertised in SLO County, or is it just Monterey County?
No, typically they've been having them actually up at Heritage Ranch.
Oh, really?
Yeah. All the past meetings have been there, not up in Monterey, because there's all the concern and protests from down here.
So you'll make sure it gets on the slowcountywater.org.
Yes, we will, and we'll make sure that Ray's aware, so we can make sure we get it out.
And you can sign up on their website to be notified of those meetings.
Well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. All right, so the next item is updates from the, it's our Board of Supervisor Districts on water issues relevant to their group or agency. And this was a program that we started this year to receive verbal updates from the various groups or agencies. And last time we didn't have as many, we were trying to go in order, just the sign-up sheet. And so last month we had the at-large folks, and so this month is the supervisor districts, and then I think we'll do RCDs and others, the next one, and then cities the one after that. So this is just you get a few minutes to stand up and say what's going on in your district. Okay. Do you want me to start, Dennis?
Sure.
Yeah? Do you want to start? But you got to stand up here and. Yeah, I know. Tim did it last time,
That's
so.
right. Come on now.
It is in our bylaws to get these updates. So.
The GSP plan's proceeding, like Greg alluded to, at the last GSA meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago. It was sent back to county staff so that they can look at some of the items that they were presenting. Mostly there was no groundwater reduction of pumping. That was an issue with one of the supervisors that was instead of John Cushon that day. There's a lot of things going on with that. We had talked about one of the issues that I have been bringing forth many times is the groundwater's, the subsidence in the basin. And the consultant that they had hired, Montgomery and Associates, they had come up with a monitoring system using some basically cell tower type data. And my point was back in 1997, the USGS had done an INSAR, which is a satellite overview of the whole basin, and it identified several areas where we had up to 2 inches of subsidence. And it hadn't really been documented before. Well, it had been documented but not recognized by various groups. They indicated there was up to, I think it was around an inch or so around by the Paso Airport, which wasn't surprising considering the wells. The other area that they didn't talk about was in the Shandon-San Juan Hills, where the USGS report in 1997 indicated that they had up to 2 inches of subsidence in that area. I found that to be significant, and I've been asking for another USGS overflight of the INSAR system to determine what the situation currently is. It's been 22 years now, and there's been a lot more ag. Hopefully it hasn't had an effect, but I think it's information that should be part of any GSP plan to see if we're at where we were 22 years ago or if it's worse. And if it's worse, that's going to impact any of the plans we do. And it's been a bit frustrating because it's largely been unpublished. So that we're trying to work through. I called USGS, and they got back to me within a day and said, well, matter of fact, we're doing it up in Monterey County, and for a cost, we can bring it down and do an overflight of your basin. And I think it's important information because it's independent of anything that we're trying to do, any type of influences that they're getting on the GSP plan from various groups. So it's accurate, it's independent, and I think it's in any GSP plan, I think that should be identified because it's one of the core key elements of any Sigma plan. So hopefully that will come to fruition, and we can really see what we have, and hopefully it's okay. But if it's not, that's going to impact anything that we do in our basin. So, and as a little other information that was interesting is in the Atascadero Basin, they had some subsidence there according to this report. Not very much, but that was, again, 22 years ago. So I think it should be, promote that as much as possible. So we'll see where the new plans go and modified and so forth. So,
what does it cost to have USGS do one basin?
Well, that's a very good question because they were supposed to present that at our last meeting, and I was told at our last WRAC meeting that it was going to be agendized. It wasn't, so they didn't talk about that at our last GSP meeting up in Paso. So hopefully we'll get a number, and hopefully that they can do that, because I don't know that number.
I mean, I'm just wondering if it makes sense for the county to look at having this review done for all of the high priority basins.
Well, I think it does because you have a historical basis. It's not bringing in this data, and the 5 areas that the consultant identified weren't in the Shandon area. They were more or less in the Paso, near the city, which is okay, but you don't have any historical basis for that. So you can't do an apples to apples comparison.
I apologize, but has the GSP actually been submitted to the state, or
no?
This is all internal.
This is all internal. We're still working through the plans.
What is the plan? Is it just slow down on the pumping?
Well, they haven't identified that yet either because they're.
Love it.
Well, no, this whole thing's.
Chapter 9's got a whole list of things that could be done.
Yes, there are projects and so forth.
Specify what's going to be done. The GSAs will just decide.
Well, that's right. There's projects that they're trying to say we could do this or that or what have you. But the reason that it went back to county staff is because it didn't adequately address a reduction in the use of groundwater pumping. So that's why it went back to the county. We'll see what they come up with. So that's what was said the last couple of weeks ago.
Will the GSPs identify a water level, like a baseline that
Yes.
cannot be?
They have their upper and lower thresholds that they're trying to develop. The consultant is, and with the hydrographs and so forth like that. That is part of what they're trying to do. And if it hits that level, then they're going to have mandatory restrictions and so forth. But that's still, that can change too. It's the minimum desirable, ground levels.
Is there a level to which the basin must be recovered by 2042?
I don't know the answer to that. They want it sustainable. So that will depend on those minimum and maximum thresholds is what as I understand it.
So
yeah, I'd say the answer is Sigma does not require recovery. It requires that it be sustainable at some level. And the public has asked for certain levels to be the objective. And that's what he's talking about with the upper level as an objective. The lower levels, more of a threshold.
And how they did that, they handed out a survey, what was it, a year or two ago?
With no background.
Right. And it was basically, I had issues with that because it asked all the stakeholders, what do you feel about this? Is this about right? And I'm going, the survey in my view is nonsense.
That's classic.
And it was. And so you're kind of going, well, who wouldn't want more water? And a lot of people said, well, I think it's about right. Well, they're saying it's about right when they don't really have a basis to quantify that. So there's a lot of balls in the air on this, and some of the premises that they started out with this, I really objected to, and I don't think it's we'll see what happens. But the questions that were asked a couple of years ago weren't that.
So the plan won't be a set of exact sequential actions to be taken, but possible actions.
So I'm going to propose that we kind of pause, because we could obviously keep going on this for quite some time.
Oh, you could go on for this forever.
Right. I mean, and it is important for us to have
those
this.
meetings too, hopefully.
Right, but I just,
it's
you
the
know,
tip of the spear
just,
because everybody's going to follow suit on however this comes out.
Well, I'll blend District 5 into District 1 since we're over the same base.
Right.
So you have these projects where then they're handing out chapters of material on a Friday and having a meeting on the Wednesday. That's last time we got 2 chapters. You had 150 pages to look over in a couple of days, and then try to tell them what you don't like or what you do like about the chapters. This is why those chapters were carried over. And a lot of the projects that the consultant has put in here is what different people have said, but it's like, and I'm just going to give examples from what I see. Paso has an area that they're in charge of. The county has an area that they're in charge of. San Juan has an area that it's in charge of. Yet they're all worried about what the projects are in the county instead of the projects that are in their area. They have to do the projects that are consistent in their area for what their problems are, just like the county has to be consistent with what it needs to do in its areas. And then there's other people that are worried about how they're going to raise money to pay for certain things. Well, it's going to be a lot harder to build a bunch of injection wells and claim that you're going to get state water. Somebody just mentioned a deal about Governor Newsom saying come up with your own localized stuff and where you're going to get your water. Right. There's a lot of contracts that were already stipulated to with the subcontractors that buy state water right now. Just because on a piece of paper it says that there's a possible 15,000 acre feet of state water that's not being used, and on your best year, you're lucky if you're going to get 50% of that, if it can be delivered, and then where are you going to put it? So just like that tunnel project, you're going to spend $60 million on some injection wells and maybe put the water in the ground, and then when you put the water in the ground, it's not considered groundwater.
Right.
It's legally separate water, and then somebody has a right to take that water back out at a given time, instead of using the diverted water that we have right now. So the thing he was talking about, the USGS, San Luis was part of a funding deal with Monterey, and so they're checking into right now, if we paid for part of this, how come some of this work isn't being done in our area? Plus, we found out our contractor is also the contractor or our consultant for Monterey, which we didn't know in the beginning. He was supposed to be. So there's a lot of different moving parts all the time. to this stuff. One of the chapters, chapter 4, was on certain amounts. There's things in that chapter that have to be changed now because of the stipulated agreement that came from the courts. So just to give you an example, Paso was using roughly 5,000 to 6,000 acre feet of water. They're stipulated now to 1,267 acre feet. Well, there's a savings right there of almost 5,000 acre feet. Where are they going to get the water? They have their Nazi water. They have river water. They have their reclaimed water that they're trying to get online. And then agreements that can be made with the different people that are next to them if they want to try to sell them Nazi water or sell them some of their reclaimed water to use in their farming operations or whatever. And some of the waters aren't even metered. So you have 3 golf courses in Paso Robles that aren't metered, that use 840 acre feet a year. And so there's things like that that they have to work out on how that stuff's going to be handled. So that's why what I said before, there's that 90-day period, 60 to 90-day period, where hopefully a lot of these problems can be worked out. It's not that they can't be worked out. It all boils down to money and who's paying for what to get what.
Greg and I, we've been tracking all of these plans and our objections to them. And we've been butting heads with this consultant almost on just every time we have a meeting. I mean, we had Todd Engineering, all kinds of engineering groups say that the capacity of the Paso Basin was called between 90 and 97,000 acre feet. He presents that, well, you're down to about 62,000 acre feet. And we're going, well, how in the world did you get that? Because that impacts the whole basin. I mean, all ag operations, the whole bit. And we're going, well, how did you do that? And, you know, after he was a little flippant, he said, well, we're hydrologists and we're good at what we do, but we took exception to that. And he's saying, well, we took out part of Monterey since we had that boundary 118 to 118 modification and the Atascadero. Well, Atascadero's been out of those numbers since
the beginning.
Yeah. And we showed him documentation that in other engineering reports they're out of it. And it's he nods and smiles and does what he wants to do.
So basically we told him, hey, you need to footnote all of your information where it's coming from. We have no way to check it or look at it without knowing. We gave him 5 reports that the county paid for, from Fugro, from Geoscience, from all the people that have been hired doing all the work in our areas and other areas. And the consultant that Mr. Senton and their group has hired is one of the guys who stood up and said, I've spent 25 years of my life working on this Paso Basin. I've built my career on this basin. Well, he was the main guy on 3 or 4 of those reports that say we're between 90,000 to 97,000. And so I find it hard to believe that a guy that's been here for 1 year can come up with 62,000 and a guy that's spent 25 years is always in the 90,000 range. And when we showed him in the reports that almost 20,000 that Atascadero subbasin, see, right off the bat, you need to add that 20,000 back to your number. That's just a minimum.
It's about 16,000 acre feet, if I recall correctly. But we asked him to quantify numbers, and we don't get it. So you can understand our frustration on this, because at some point he's going to have to tell us how he got to these numbers, because we're not going to say, we're not rolling over. And because it's for everyone's benefit, even people that are in large ag. Nobody wants to go from 90,000 acre feet down to 62 or 65,000 acre feet, impact all of their ag business operations. That's not fair to them either. So we need to, there has to be some basis, some rationale for when he comes up with these numbers, how he got there, and we really haven't seen it yet. So we're not real happy with him.
Sorry.
The Irrigation Training Research Center uses what they call metrics. So they use satellite imagery, which is available to everyone, Landsat images, that are taken every 2 weeks. And they have, metric is a model that's been developed and used in agriculture in the western United States. But it essentially determines the evapotranspiration for each pixel, which is 30 meters by 30 meters, I believe, and determines the actual crop water usage, which is evapotranspiration. And so these images are available for every 2 weeks for as long as they've been taking these images. So you also combine that with the land use, and you can determine what has actually been used. Obviously, there's 2 week span, so there's some sort of interpolation between these two images.
Well, that's a lot better than 22 years.
Yeah. So.
So you got my.
Like what I'm hearing is like you guys need to know how much is used, right? And you need to know how much is sustainably used, or what is going to be required.
Well, and I think everybody can agree this. We just want to know. We want a relatively a number that we can, all of us can accurately agree upon that is a fair number of what is the safe yield for us to use every year without having a problem, so we can meet the criteria of the state, and at the same time, we don't have a problem. If we know that the basin is good, and I'll just make up a number, at 80,000 acre feet a year, and we know that if we use 80,000 acre feet a year for what we're doing right now, we're not going to have a problem. Then we know. Okay, now the problem comes, how do you divvy up the 80,000? Well, that's really not a problem anymore because certain areas have been stipulated to certain amounts, and other people are going to have to be correlated users the way that the law is written, and they're going to have to equally share in what's left. And de minimis users are going to be de minimis users, and bigger users are going to be bigger users. And you're going to have to work your business model on what is available to you. And if you want to work out a deal with somebody else to get some other kind of extra water that they happen to have because they're not using it, like Nacimiento water, then you're going to have to build your own infrastructure and figure out how you're going to get it. You're not going to ask the other people to build the infrastructure for you so that you can get more water to do something you want to do and they get no benefit.
Basically, we're just looking for an accurate representation of the basin.
Transparency?
Keyword in politics.
Did county hire the consultant that's working for?
It was the cooperative committee hired the consultant.
So they got a grant for 1.5 million, a matching money grant, and he's charging, unless he added to it, 1.3 million.
Yeah,
And one of his big guys that he worked for was the DWR, so he probably already knew what the grant was for. But that's okay.
Yeah.
It's all being done, and everything so far is on a that's been coming on a schedule, and we seem to be going there. So it's just fine tuning what's in the different things that are going to be done in the areas so that we can all get together and live together and not have a problem.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well done. All right. Let's get one more done and see how the timing is. Linda, do you want to? Linda.
I actually have no report, so I've been gone. I'll do it next month.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yep. Jim, do you want to?
Well, I don't have much. District 4 for the Northern Cities Management Area, which is Arroyo Grande, Rover Beach, Pismo Beach, Oceano, and the Cienega Valley or Arroyo Grande Valley. That's the Northern Cities Management Area. We've been in the throes of getting the groundwater model that extends basically from southern Pismo Beach to the Santa Maria River, covering that portion of the Santa Maria River Valley groundwater basin. And we're now at a stage where we have a draft model that we're looking at. But it's only draft, and we're still working on it. So I'm kind of hoping to bring a full report to the committee in a few months, but it's not ready yet. That's the way it's on that.
But it includes Napomo, Mesa, all that.
All the way to the Santa Maria River.
Okay.
Yeah. But mainly we're looking at the old Arroyo Grande groundwater basin, which we call, and the Napomo Mesa management area basin.
Thank you. I don't think Bill was here, right?
Right.
Yeah, so we'll pick up Bill and Linda next time. Thanks all. God, super awesome information. Let's see. So our next item is the WRAC bylaws. This was just kind of a routine review of our bylaws. Eric.
Basically, they look good to me, except there's some redundant words that don't seem to make sense where they are on page 18 of the agenda, where we're at Article 3, number 9, middle of the paragraph. The chair may also appoint members of the public to a subcommittee subject to majority approval by the WRAC and the Brown Act and. I don't understand the function of the words and the Brown Act and.
And the Brown Act, comma.
Subject to majority approval by the WRAC.
I mean, the WRAC adheres to the Brown Act. Ad hoc subcommittees don't have to. I'm not quite sure what those words are doing there. Subject to approval, majority approval by the WRAC, provided that such members of the public do not constitute a majority of the subcommittee.
It seems like they're trying to say subject to the Brown Act, subject to the majority approval of the WRAC and subject to the Brown Act. That's
so
the subcommittee.
What we're saying is that the action to approve such members needs to be agendized as a Brown Act matter, which would continue the naming of the subcommittee for an added month, or what?
Yeah, so the intent there was if any members of the public participate in the subcommittee, that subcommittee is now subject to the Brown Act.
Oh,
yes.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe it could be worded subject to the majority approval by the WRAC and to the application of the Brown Act to the subcommittee.
You wouldn't have the Brown Act apply to the subcommittee.
Well, I think Ray was just telling us it would if members of the public
if there's members of the public
joined it.
in the subcommittee.
Where in the Brown
How about
Act-
we maybe we could kind of do some finessing of the wording on that? It might just be a semicolon, a strategic semicolon, or second sentence, or something like that.
Yes.
Do you want to just finesse it for next time?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because it says that the chair can appoint a person of the public and not to have a majority, and that they need to follow the Brown Act.
Is the logic of this because there are members of the public attending, other members of the public need to know these meetings are happening?
No, there are members of the public that attend that, the committee here, they would provide good input to a subcommittee if we were to, form one.
Right.
That was really the intent there.
So just to be clear on the legality of it, you're saying if a subcommittee is made up entirely of WRAC members and alternates, and it's definitely clearly ad hoc for a specified task, it doesn't need to comply with the Brown Act. But if members of the public are appointed to such a committee, it does?
Yes.
Where is the citation in the Brown Act?
I don't know. That was actually what our county council told me.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know.
And so the logic would be because some members of the public know these meetings are happening, other members of the public are entitled to know they're happening. Is that basically the logic behind it?
Yeah, because they're...
Good luck, Eric.
Yeah.
Done.
Anyway, thank you. This makes it clear why the words are here, and
called
hopefully we can make them a little more.
Yeah, I know, right? We're trying to get Steve on something, so we had to get that figured out. All right, so we'll maybe some clarifying
we'll
language
clarify
for next time.
So
I mean,
we'll
if
see
Eric
a
Greening can't
clean-
figure it out the way it's written, then there's a problem. Any other issues with the bylaws? I looked through them. I had one clarifying question that Ray already took care of. Tim?
Well, yeah, I did have one.
Okay.
In the very first paragraph, it says the committee shall determine the needs and financial capabilities of the district. And I guess I just have a little bit of a problem with that because we don't really determine the financial capabilities of the district. We make recommendations based on the information that we're given by the flood control district.
Why did you just change determine to review?
I would agree with that.
Or shall base our recommendations on the needs and financial capabilities of the district.
We don't determine those needs.
Committee shall review the needs and capabilities and make recommendations.
All right, so there seems that determine is kind of a problematic.
Right.
Yeah.
It implies that we have the authority over the budget.
Exactly.
Right.
I think
So.
the word is review instead of determine.
Yeah, so let's kind of pencil in review or makes recommendations based on or something, and Ray we can work on that and bring it back for next time at the same time.
So Tim, you think that would be like instead of saying shall determine, you say shall review?
I mean, I'm a little, review seems a little lightweight to me.
Or discuss would be
I
another
mean, I like
possible
kind
word.
of that make recommend.
I like the
Base
end.
our recommendations.
Well, it does say that at the end. It says upon deliberation shall convey their recommendations. I think you shall, that we
Evaluate?
review, or we were, well.
Evaluate the needs and financial
Review,
capabilities, maybe?
Well, in recent memory, where this was actually exercised was when we determined the emergency contingency.
Right.
For the budget.
Or even the $50,000.
Yeah, even the $50,000. That was,
But we don't make the determination. We only evaluate it and make recommendations. So I don't know how you want to say it, but
okay.
I agree that when you use the word determine, it basically says that we're the authority on what that is, and what that financial responsibility is. So I would say if that's the case, then we're going to freaking hey, we're going to decide where the money goes.
Woohoo! Okay.
Can you wordsmith something and bring it back?
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah. We'll work on
Otherwise, awesome.
Good. Any others? Okay, so we'll table it till next meeting. Okay, and then finally discuss the future agenda items. And we have quite a list. I think Partners in Water Conservation is still targeted for next month, June. I haven't talked to Michael or Borman or others about kind of coordinating that last piece. We'll have to check in, but they were going to have a special landscape, watershed-wise landscape program that they're implementing in Santa Barbara County that we had talked about as one of our recommendations for water conservation strategies.
Well, I think I heard one early from.
I was going to say.
From Steph to hear.
Wall, maybe you might want to get in touch with her because she had some good information that we had talked about before the meeting, but things that she might like to bring to us, just a short report.
Yeah.
And before, while
that localized water source.
It's timely for her, having just been
good idea.
to this committee.
Reasonable.
Anytime I hear localized program, that to me is like the state is pushing things downhill, waiting to take something else away. They always make me very nervous. Yeah, they always make me very nervous. So yeah, I'd be interested in hearing more.
Yeah. Okay, Eric.
To the extent that seeking funds for installing the 19-foot gates on the Salinas Dam continues to be in our county's legislative platform, some kind of an item illuminating how such a project would be used, how it would be paid for, how the safety issues would be navigated, given the people who would be up for inundation downstream, the riparian areas upstream that would be inundated. There are a lot of considerations about such a project that don't seem to get any attention, even as we have people actively in Washington seeking funds for such a project from the county. And I know that some of the people seeking funds are supposedly representing North County interests, and yet the last time such a project was being seriously considered, the North County was almost unanimous in opposition and thought it was a project by which San Luis Obispo would take more of our Salinas River water. There has been no change in the live stream agreement since that time. So there is a whole constellation of issues. If it is being actively talked about and funding is being actively sought, it would be nice to have some kind of an item that would clarify what interests are seeking it, what assumptions are they making about how the water would be used, and what questions do we recognize need to be dealt with in new environmental review, since the old EIR is very stale.
Do we have some ability to give an update on that? Do we have?
Probably not an update.
Or
that would be a county public works thing to bring to this. Awareness on that.
Who's taking point on that stealth little operation that's been going on?
Well, we could.
So that's an unfair term. We'll take that back.
Who's the person? Yeah, we'll put it on the agenda on the future agenda items. But quite frankly, I don't have solid information that I could give you all. But I can give the information that I have.
I'd be interested to know when people go to Washington, public officials go to Washington and ask for money for it, what kind of a project they're describing. And what kind of purpose they're describing.
Come on now.
But if it's super, I mean, if it's
Probably not prioritized.
I mean, I just wonder at what point, if something's conceptual and would have to go through all kinds of hurdles and discussion, how much detail do we need at this point? Aaron, do you want to kind of chime in real quick?
To clarify a little bit about what the live stream agreement actually does right there, that is somewhat protected by North County water interests. So as the current operating for the Salinas Reservoir occurs, water flows into the lake, and no water is held back until the live stream actually flows all the way from the lake to the point of confluence with the Nacimiento River. So no water. So anything that could be saturated or percolated into the groundwater basin has already occurred. So that water would otherwise be flowing out of San Luis County entirely. And until that point, only when that water is flowing across there does any water actually get held back into the Salinas Reservoir. So the live stream agreement actually is protective of the North County interests for that reason.
But the idea, the concept here is that once live stream happens, that we start holding back water, and then this would be an effort to kind of have it hold back even more, right? That we are extending the dam up.
I believe that's what's being contemplated.
Right, and most of the recharge happens, or the recharge into the underflow happens when it's basically bank to bank, and you can have a live stream that's just a tiny sheet of, as long as there's something wet. So, I mean, the hydrology can be argued over. I'm not going to push it too hard because probably there isn't something imminent right now. It just, because it keeps showing up on legislative platforms, it's clearly in some people's minds as an active solution to something.
I know Frank Meacham was very.
And he was against it.
No, he was for that. He wanted that increased storage.
If there's anything that can be done to the dam, the flood control needs to own it first.
Right.
That was the problem.
And that's the problem. And there's 100 steps that need to happen before that even happens.
Well, we don't need an update next month. I'm just saying conceptually it should be on the list. And then probably in December we'd want Ron Munns back to, if there is an imminent release of a draft EIR, perhaps an action item around December to spin off a subcommittee.
Good point. Okay.
On the tunnel, the Nacimiento.
All right. So for June, hopefully we can get staff. We'll have the watershed-wise landscape, and then we'll take a break for July and August, and we won't have an imminent EIR to do, and then coming back in the fall, we're lining up climate change impact on water resources from the Water Quality Control Board. Anything else? Yeah, David.
One thing I would be interested in, as we're heading for more recharge, and particularly secondary use water, I believe most of our water plants have a minimal list of things they go for. The things like birth control chemicals and things like that aren't routinely looked at. And I know in areas in the Midwest and East, that's become a very significant problem of gradual buildup of nasty chemicals and things like that in the water supply. Somehow I'd like to know who's testing what and what is being missed if we are going to start recharging water in a big way. There's a whole bunch of nasty compounds that are building in our system, which we tend to ignore. And we spew them into our bathrooms every day. So.
All right, so kind of the quality of recycled water being used for groundwater recharge.
Are we testing for it, and how much we know, essentially, about what is actually going into the streams?
Okay, good. We'll think about that as a potential topic. All right, anything else we can grab on for next time? All right, and then the last item is public comment for items not on the agenda. Does anybody have anything? Tricia?
Yes. I just think that if the committee wants to know more about the Paso Basin GSP and the development thereof, you might consider having Angela Roberto from county staff, who seems to be the most consistent person assigned by the county. The theory of this is that the consultant presents a high level of the chapters that he has worked on and released to the cooperative committee. Then those GSAs are to take that back to their boards or engaged members and suggest whatever elements of it they would like to see changed or revised. The public has ample time to make comments online about those chapters. So,
or come to board meetings.
Or come to the cooperative committee meetings or go to board meetings of the GSAs. So it is somewhat more organized, if you will, than I think you heard today. And it would not be a bad thing possibly for the WRAC to get more information about how this process is proceeding and what some of the concerns are. There are concerns with what the consultant has presented.
Any other thoughts on that?
I mean, they're like the first ones out of the gate, right? I mean, it'd be real interesting to get a presentation on what's in it and what it's supposed to do. Like I'm kind of surprised that they're not coming up with actionable, implementable actions.
Well, they are, but they're not doing the actions or doing the implementation. Yeah, it's a plan, and then the plan is implemented after the plan is adopted.
And then you have 5 years. They're going to look at it over a 5-year period, and you have to show progress, or that you aren't going in a deficit, or the DWR is going to step back in and tell you need to modify your plan. It's not working. Part of the problem is some of the areas that are involved. Shannon San Juan is a water district. They're at certain meetings. They get to look at the GSP and do certain things. And as for the county, we have staff that looks at stuff. They're directed by the supervisors, and the supervisors have a lot more other things to do, and they're getting the paperwork at a certain time. So when they say, well, we'll just bring the GSP back and look at it, or we'll bring a chapter back and look at it and talk about it, they're giving direction why they're supposed to be writing it, so that when it's put out to the public, they don't have to take it back and change a bunch of stuff on it. And that's why having 5 days to look at 150 pages and try to find out what they did is kind of hard.
Well,
But you
maybe I
have
can.
ample time to submit comments. It's not like you only have those 5 days to submit comments.
You know what? Everybody else is paid to be there. There's a lot of people that are going to this stuff that we have other lives, and they can't spend every single day researching that they're not going to have a problem because somebody put something in a report that they didn't see.
All right. Well, how about let me check in with staff and see what would be kind of effective and helpful so that we don't end up, being a sidebar to specific issues, but which ones would be broadly helpful for WRAC as a whole. So thank you. I appreciate that.
The county does have majority voting power on the GSA there, although it takes a 2/3 vote to take an action, as I understand it. But because we advise the county, and because the county is a very, very major player, it's not just an irrelevant separate district and separate process. The county is integral to it, and I think our interest can be expressed on that basis.
Good point.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, that's a good, helpful perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. We want to look at it more holistically than say, oh, this is this GSP and then hammer that. I mean, it's more like this is what the process is. Here's what we were seeing. So that we have a better understanding of how these things are going to be developed.
Yeah. Fascinating. All right. Any other public comments for items not on the agenda? All right. Seeing none, we will adjourn until our next regular meeting, which is June 5th at 1:30, and we'll be back in the library community room. So thank you all.
Well,